So I'm going to invite our final speaker for the day to the stage, Kathy Little for RNIB. Kathy Little describes herself as a 55-year-old mother of two teenagers. I'm just reading off here, Kathy, I haven't... who works part-time from home. Leisure pursuits include yoga, running, walking with the family cocker spaniel and making marmalade. However, it was not always thus. In 2017, Kathy was hit by a mysterious virus which made her extremely ill and left her severely visually impaired almost overnight. Before catastrophe struck, she had been employed in senior roles in a corporate environment with all the stress and trappings of a six-figure salary. Kathy is a graduate of Sussex and Kingston universities. She has worked for several creative organisations, including the BBC, EMI Records, Sotheby's and latterly WPP. She's a passionate music fan, news hound and anti-Brexiteer. She says she's only agreed to do this talk because she wants to get some things off her chest. So, Kathy, welcome.
Okay, let me just get to grips with the technology. Yeah. Hello everybody. It's very nice to be here. I come here as a private individual rather than representing an organisation. I guess I was asked to talk to you by the RNIB, who were given my details by my consultant at King's College Hospital, the man in charge of ophthalmic neurology, which is brains and eyes. And my brief really today is to talk to you, I'm probably not going to be more than about 20 minutes, is to talk to you and give you my very personal story. It's a bit weird for me to talk about myself for 20 minutes. My husband was, I was talking about that this morning, but I'm going to, unashamedly, I'm going to tell you the nightmare and the drama I've been through because I'm told that apparently it brings some reality and some context to the stories of disabled people. Yes, as Ed said, I was struck by an illness at the age of 53. I'm now 55, nearly 56, and I'm going to talk to you about what that's been like. Yeah? So, my backstory. This horrible photograph here was what I call my starchy knickers phase, when I was the director of talent management, HR, whatever you want to call it, in several large creative organisations. And I actually was cool. I was fine with the title starchy knickers. I called myself that because in creative organisations, which can be a bit fruity, you do have to sugarcoat the HR, you shouldn't be doing this didactic pill a little bit. So it was actually a way of me having a bit of fun with them. But I was that person, like I'm sure many of you. It was a really stressful job. I enjoyed it. I worked for several organisations, had a career of about 25 years, and got to the age of about 52 and my kids are teenagers. I became absolutely exhausted, slightly disillusioned, as quite a lot of my friends in our 50s are, with corporate life. I think technology and globalisation have made the world of work so much tougher. Some good things, but a lot of really bad things. Everybody trying to eat everyone else's lunch. I got more and more senior. I'm going to say the word men, but I was going through the menopause. Channel 4 have a policy now on the menopause. I couldn't even say the word in the workplace. And I decided that enough was enough, and I decided to hand in my notice without a job to go to. That was in May 2017. I then took the summer off, thinking, well, I'll have some time off and I will pick up do some freelance work, consultancy work, find something else to do. My husband was very supportive. My kids were, I think, delighted. And I spent the summer having a lovely time, reacquainting myself with my children, doing lots of running. We got a lovely little puppy, which I'd always said to my children, no, absolutely not having that. And we got a dog. And it was all going really marvellously well. I'd set up my own little company. I was going to start doing bits of consultancy. However, on the 1st of October, 2017, I woke up with a headache one Saturday morning, and I get headaches, so I thought nothing of it. And as the day went on, I noticed that my left eye was blurring, and I thought I must have some mascara in it or something, and rubbed it. Didn't really think much more of it. Over the weekend, still had a headache, was taking paracetamol, and by Monday, I was Googling migraines, which I don't get, and it said if it goes on for more than 3 days and your eyesight's not great, you should go to the doctor. So I went to my GP, gave me some anti-migraine medication. It didn't touch the sides, and I started to get more ill. By more ill, I mean started vomiting, and within about 5 days, I was in bed with, I can honestly say, the worst flu-like symptoms I've ever had. Very, very sick, vomiting all the time, and my left eye, the vision in my left eye was getting more and more blurred. So, needless to say, I did all the things you do. I went to see my GP, who sent me to A&E, spent a lovely 5.5 hours in A&E in my local hospital, got seen at 8 o'clock at night, was told to come back the next day, was misdiagnosed with something called optic neuritis, which is a fairly common swelling of the optic nerve and happens in one eye. Went home, was told it would clear up in a couple of weeks. It didn't. I got more and more ill, and then about a week later, my right eye, the vision in my right eye, started to deteriorate. I was so ill, I just thought, oh, screw this. Okay, now my right eye's going. I really didn't realise what was happening to me. So I went back to the doctor, the GP, and they phoned a neurologist at my local hospital. I hadn't dealt with a neurologist, I dealt with ophthalmic people. She immediately put me on enough steroids to kill a horse, apparently, I've later been told, and said, I'll come and see me in 2 days. So I went back, and by this stage I was so ill, I was leaning on my husband in the waiting room, and huge black eyes like saucers. I love the NHS, but they're under a lot of strain, so she didn't have my papers. They were turning the lights out, and I went into her office, and she took one look at me and said, what do you mean you can't see? And I said, well, I can't see. And she she just said, I think she actually swore, and said something about brain tumours, multiple sclerosis. And it was at that point I actually began to really, really, really panic and was very frightened. Anyway, I was then rung the next morning and said, we have a bed for you at King's College Hospital, and my husband drove me up there, and I spent 3 weeks in a neurology ward at King's College Hospital, having every type of invasive treatment you can possibly think of. I said to my friends, it was like being in a prison, but a prison where they torture you every day. And so every day my curtain would be drawn back, and I would have lumbar punctures, plural, blood transfusions, scans, brain scans, body scans, needles. I'm terrified of needles everywhere, all the time. And at the end of the 2 to 3 weeks, which was so frightening, I was discharged from hospital with all of the doctors saying, we have absolutely no idea what's happened to you. You are a complete and utter fluke. Medical unicorn. We've never seen this before. We tested you for every single possible cause, but we cannot find anything wrong with you other than your optic nerves are completely fried. And the optic nerve, for those of you that don't know, there's actually nothing wrong with my eyes. The optic nerve is the cable that leads from your eye, which is the window, to your brain, which is your computer. And my cable is screwed, severely screwed. So that means I see about, like you're all in a very, very misty shower. I have about 25% vision. I have no definition of anything. I have some spatial awareness. I certainly can't drive. I can't read. And I was discharged at the end of 2017, October, basically with a Kent Association for the Blind card and a disability registration, and left to get on with it. And again, the dear old NHS, they're very good if they think you're dying, but if you're not dying, you're pretty much on your own. So I thought I'd just give you that background because it was what you might call a bit of a shocker and not in the script, and quite unusual because, I learned from the RNIB that there are something like 2 million people in the UK with visual impairment. I am technically severely visually impaired. And I think it's really interesting. My story is about learning to deal with something that wasn't in the script and that happened to me very late on in life when I was kind of what you might call a player. I had a big job, I had a life, which I had just given up. There's a school of thought that says, by the way, that it was a chronic and prolonged stress that caused my illness, but the doctors laughed at me when I said that, but I still hang on to that thought, but that's a conversation for another day. So there's the backstory, and what I'm now going to do is talk a little bit about my recovery and what those 2 years looked like after the nightmare of October 2017. Oh, and my diagnosis, by the way, bilateral optical neuropathy, which translated into English means bilateral both eyes, optic nerves, neuropathy means to die. So my optic nerves in both my eyes are very poor. Okay, returning to work, I think that's what that slide says, in June 2018. I don't do many words on PowerPoint because I can't read them, but I decided to do a photo of these two cards because they're really significant to me. They are my Kent Association for the Blind card and my disabled travel card. And I was utterly freaked out to be given these pieces of paper, to be labelled, I'm sorry if I know there are lots of disabled people in the room here, but to be labelled disabled, I couldn't get my head around it. This was, as I keep saying, not in the script. I'm not disabled, but I was, and I am. My Kent Association for the Blind card, I virtually told them to go away in not very nice language when they rang me to offer help. I was really in denial and shock and very, very traumatised. I was taking a lot of sedatives, a lot of steroids, a lot of medication all throughout all this time to deal with the trauma. I was then approached through some of my contacts about applying for a job as a coach, learning development coach, with a company that I work for now. You can find out who they are on my LinkedIn profile, but I'm not going to publicly name them. I was approached to go along and apply for this job part-time as a learning development coach, which is working with apprentices in the workplace taking level 5 leadership and management qualifications. Sounded right up my alley. Working with, up-and-coming managers. And in actual fact, I work with 6 people here at BT, funnily enough. So I went along for the interview, decided not to tell them about my disability at the interview, went along, was my best, steadying myself as I walked into the room with 2 people I was interviewed, offered me the job straight away, and I thought, okay, I now have to tell them that I have this disability. Rather sweetly, they said, oh, no, it doesn't matter at all, it'd be fine, we really want you for the job, no, you're great, because my CV was kind of what they were, what they were looking for. And they, bless them, just took me on, and I've got to say, they and I went on a massive journey together. I knew nothing, and they knew nothing about how to handle a severely visually impaired, blind, whatever you want to call it, person. They had no idea at all. And I think, as you said earlier, these are not nasty people. These are nice people who just don't know what to do, and as I didn't. Okay, so I went into work. I've got a couple of slides at the end with what I'm sure will be bread and butter to most of you, with my personal tips, advice to employers, things I learned, things that I wish my employer and I had known and done, which I'll just pick off a couple of them. But it was, I'm not going to lie, it was an absolute nightmare going back into the workplace. Apart from the trauma and the bursting into tears everywhere all the time, I was an absolute traumatised. I think I was suffering from post-traumatic stress. In fact, I know I was. Burst into tears in reception, in the loos. I burst into tears at reception of all my clients. I burst into tears at Charing Cross train station when I showed the guy my disabled card. At my local train station, I was absolutely, arguably, should not have gone back to work. So I think I felt incredibly vulnerable. I still do. I still walk like this most of the time and obviously can't drive, can't read, but I felt massively vulnerable in public places, people knocking me around. My employer had no idea at all about what kind of technology I might need, how to help me in a meeting. They would forget, there would be a lack of communication. I would come in and say, look, I was terribly apologetic for my situation as well, because I was so pathetically grateful to have a job. and still dealing with my trauma. This once quite stroppy HR director that could take anyone on. I was absolutely a shadow of my former self. I was very, very vulnerable and scared. So didn't push back on anything. So we used to sit in meetings with them all, so insensitively now with hindsight, talking about, you all need to do a mail merge or this, that and the other, and I couldn't even see my screen. So really had a difficult time. Eventually had to get quite assertive and stroppy with HR, and they began to help me, work with me, and we started to find a way through. I now have a 32-inch high-definition screen at home, which my employer has provided me with. I have Apple Mac products, which are incredibly good for visually impaired people because they have built-in reading devices. You can talk to them. I have read over. I have my headphones so I can read long documents. I can, with these bottle top glasses, send emails. I can read the font. It's all very big. I have learned how to use technology, but it was very, very challenging at the beginning. So I'm now 2 years on, and I've put this cheesy photo up. So I put that photo up because I'm so proud of myself. So part of the getting out of my pit of depression and I'm worthless, you talked about self-esteem, I totally know how that feels. I'm nothing, I'm nobody, what am I? I lay on the sofa crying for about 3 months, and then I just thought, I'm really bored with this, actually. I'm bored with feeling this bad, and I started putting things into my day, like going for a walk with my aforementioned Cocker Spaniel, who I love. She's my therapy dog. She used to lie on my chest when I was crying, and this little puppy, and she would just kind of sigh and look at me. I really understand the concept of therapy dogs now. Anyway, I decided to, as well as going back to work, which was a nightmare, just to put all these things in place. And swimming, I took up yoga. I now listen to audiobooks, which has become my passion. I can't really watch TV because my eyes sting too much, so I've always got books on the go. I've completely had to adapt. And one of the things I've done is taken up running in a really big way. I used to be a couple of times a week, 3 or 4 miles, but I've started really training with a group who are fantastic. And I set myself the target last October of doing 2 things, running a half marathon and also going on a yoga retreat to India, which I did, and I came back feeling incredible. People say there's a 2-year gap with bereavement, and I think maybe it coincided with that, but I felt really, really good. So, and now I'm here today talking to all of you. That's a really long backstory, but I think it gives you a feel for how these weird, flukish things can happen to any of us, you know, and I just wanted to share that with you, really. Moving on, I'm just going to pick off some of these because, sorry if this is a bit death by PowerPoint, so many of this will be bleeding obvious to so many of you. But just to make a few little observations and sort of riff on a couple of them. Okay. Is that the RNIB's details, or? Yes. Ah, okay. That's been put in because you may well, you know, if you are. Well, what I'm going to go on to say is about how work with third parties. Yeah. So this is my slide. So the RNIB's details are in my presentation. Blindingly obvious to say it, but, you know, neither I nor my employer really knew who to reach out to for help. The RNIB, I was kind of in denial, so I gave them a really hard time, but I did ring them a few times when I was trying to cope with technology and work, and I can say at the very least I had about 3 sobbing down the phone sessions with 3 extremely nice young men who listened to me and let me cry a lot and gave me some pointers. So, but they are fantastic, and they're obviously there for advice for employers, for visually impaired people. That's your first port of call. Access to work, I don't really have much very good to say about them. I don't know if any of you know about them, but it's a sort of, the government doesn't give money away without making it really, really difficult for people. And I had a sort of Daniel Blake moment when I was dealing with access to work. I did actually say that to this horrible woman on the phone who, just to give you a small example, I said, well, can I get help with my transport to and from work? Because obviously I have to take Ubers and taxis everywhere and in London. And her response was, well, you have to give us 3 months' worth of journeys, and we have to take the average cost of your monthly journeys, and then you have to get quotes from 3 different cab companies, and then we'll look at it as to whether or not we can get you. And I said, you know what? I'm visually impaired. That's more stress. I didn't care. And so that was my experience with Access to Work, just to say. But if you've got the time and the inclination and the whatever, then they're worth tapping up. Yeah, using technology, I mean, making reasonable adjustments, yeah, we all know that phrase. For me, it was technology, and actually my employer, when I started to stamp my foot and talk to somebody sympathetic in HR, then I have had the help I need, but it took me quite a long time to get it, and I had to make a really big fuss, and because I didn't even know what I needed. Think about it, you've just lost your sight, you're still in shock, you're not thinking straight. I just really didn't know. So, but now I have the kit I need, and they really jump when I ask for something. I think they've got a red circle around my name at work. Yeah, show compassion and empathy. I mean, you said the same thing. It's when somebody's traumatised or they've got low self-esteem, what can I say? And I have actually had a lot of compassion and empathy from my colleagues when I burst into tears because I had 40 emails and I'd come back from holiday and I couldn't read them. And I rang one of my colleagues and sobbed down the phone. That's how pathetic I was, traumatised. But, that's how people are. Are there any finance people here? Put your hand up if you're from a CFO. None, right? I knew it. You see, my last three points here, again, they do not represent the views of the RNIB or BT or anyone except myself. And I worked at senior level in very, very, tough, profit-driven, stakeholder value-driven organisations. But what you really need to do as talent people, and we should all push on this, is really push back against that reptilian CFO who is absolutely focused because his or her bonus depends on the margins and how well our numbers look, the numbers look at the end of the year. It's a really big thing in companies because, I'm going to be blunt, I can't talk about how it would be employing an autistic person, but to employ a visually impaired person, it's a little bit expensive. They've had to shell out a couple of £1,000s on my kit, and arguably my workload can't be, they have to make reasonable adjustments for me. So the CFO is never going to like that. So a couple of corollaries to that really are, additional points to that are, use whatever it takes. We know, don't we? You've got legislation, tick, obviously, fear of legislation, good thing. But reputation, absolutely, reputation is increasingly important now. And, and humanity, frankly. You may not be able to get the CFO to show any humanity, but, sorry, I'm really down on CFOs. But you will have other people in your organisation and your boards that might find a story like mine, that poor woman, and people that just need to be given a break because we're all on this planet together. Sounds a bit fluffy, but, kindness is incredibly important in these difficult times. So whatever it takes. And finally linked to that, I'm old and probably a baby boomer / Generation Xer, but millennials are a lot nicer and a lot more compassionate and a lot more interested in diversity and this kind of thing than I was, and embrace that. I remember doing a staff survey way back, one of the first I ever did, and one of the things that came back from it was a big advertising agency, was that people wanted to give more back to society. I thought they were going to moan on about pay and rations and everything, but it was a big thing about wanting to feel that these kids, these younger 25, 30-year-olds, really wanted to do something for the environment. So we started working with business within the community, and it was a really interesting eye-opener for me. So again, I guess, in your battle with the CFO, embrace these people, use them, get them on your side. Lastly, this one's a bit of a joke, really. It's sort of repeating it. What not to do. Fail to communicate to colleagues. One of the things that's upset me so much, I'm nearly finished, by the way, has been having to repeat my situation over and over and over and over and over. Somebody sent me a spreadsheet on a Friday afternoon saying, can you please amend this by 5 o'clock? you know I can't. Why haven't you been told? I've told, and I can actually see why disabled people get narky, because they've had a lifetime of having to push back, having to constantly, it's all right the first time, second time, third time, 28th time. By the time it's the 30th time, you've a bit fed up. And I would err on the side of telling people that this person, especially if it's a hidden disability like mine, that, you know, to just plan ahead and make sure that people know and that you don't, again, get that stuff. Yeah, don't assume that the person concerned. I was hopeless to start with. I was shocked, in denial, trauma. I didn't know what I wanted or needed. All I wanted to do was go in a heap and cry. There's that stuff. And last of all, and this is my final funny story, I don't let loose cannon managers within a mile of any sort of person with a disability, special needs or whatever. And my particular example of this was a guy who was, for a very short period of time, technically my line manager. And during a conversation once, he actually said to me, "I don't like to mention this, love, but are you sure you should actually be working?" And yes, that happened. And for one of the very, very rare times in my life, I was actually speechless. But the effect it had on me was I wasn't angry, I wasn't militant, I was crushed. I was absolutely crushed, because it said to me, "You're not worth anything. You know, you're disabled, you can't see, you're a bit of a, well, you shouldn't be doing this, you should go off and weave baskets or something." So watch out for those people. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.